Hey everybody, and welcome to Firebase Semi-live, the show where we code it live here and you watch it later. In the next few episodes, we're going to look into something that I am particularly excited about, how to integrate Firebase with SwiftUI. Apple have released SwiftUI at WWDC 2019, and it has changed the way how we build UIs completely. However, there seems to be some uncertainty about how to integrate Firebase in a SwiftUI application. So today we're going to fix this. I'll show you how to build a simple task list application using SwiftUI, combine Firebase, Firestore, Firebase authentication, and sign in with Apple. Wow, that's a lot of stuff to get through. We better get started. But before we start writing some code, let's take a look at how the application is going to look like in the end. Those of you who use the iOS Reminders app will notice the similarities. On the main screen, you'll see that we've got a header and a button on the bottom. And when I press the button, it will add a new line here for me to add a new task. So let's do this. Let's begin with implementing the UI, add the task, and let's add another one, and then we need to connect to Firebase. And then let's add another one. There is a big question mark. What happens? And in the end, finally, profit. All right, so hopefully by the end of this episode, we'll have finished implementing the UI. And one thing that I like to point out, so if we have a look at what's going on my screen here, let me show this. So what we're looking at is the Firebase console, and we have a look at the Firestore instance that is running as the backend to my application here. And if we look into that, you will notice that all the elements that I added to my task list already have appeared here. So as one example, let's change the completion state of this element here. And if you pay attention to the completion state down there in the console, you will notice that once I change it in my application, it will be updated in Firestore. Awesome. So let's get down to writing some code. So let me bring up Xcode, and then we will start writing the application. Let's minimize this window, this one as well. And then we will get started with a new Xcode application. We will use a single view application. Let's call it Make It So Semi-live Live. And we want to use SwiftUI for the UI. And let's place it in this folder here. All right. So the first thing that you'll see is that we've got our SwiftUI view here for the content view. And this is the normal start for all our applications, but what we want to do first is we want to define our data model. So let's create a new folder to hold our data model. So first of all, a new folder here, let's call it model, and then let me add a new file, and this is going to be a Swift file. Let's call it task, because we want to talk about tasks here. So in our application, we want to track tasks. And those tasks have a number of attributes that are important. For example, they will have a title, and they will also have a completion state. Completed. All right. So why don't we turn this into proper Swift code? So first of all, this needs to be a struct, and then Let's close this here, and then we will turn these into properties, variable title, and this is going to be a string. And the completed state is going to be a Boolean. Right. So to make our job easier, let's also define some test data that we can use while building the UI. So let me hide this in a debug statement here. And then let's create a collection of test data. Test data tasks. And it's going to be a collection of tasks. Implement the UI, and let's say this is true. Connect to Firebase, and this is false because we haven't finished this yet. And then a couple of question marks. And let's have the profit element as well. All right, cool. So we've got some test data here. We've got our struct to keep the data. That's great. So I know this is a rather simple data model, and you might be wondering, how to support advanced use cases, for example, like keeping track of the due date and managing multiple task lists, and maybe even sharing data with other users and stuff like that. So these are all great ideas, and we will definitely look into them in later episodes of the series. But for now, let's focus on the simple things and just deal with tasks and whether they're completed or not. Right, so what's next? Oh, I know, we need the UI. So let's go ahead and refactor our structure a little bit more. So let me move those elements here into a new group. And this is going to be the app group. And then let's do another group for all our views. All right, so let me pull this up here. Okay, so we've got our app group, our model group, and our view group. And let's go back into our content view. And instead of using the name content view, let's rename it and use something more meaningful. So refactor rename, and let's call it task list view. Hit enter to rename. And there we go. So let me increase the window a little bit so we can see more. And then let's have a look at how the UI looks like in the preview. So by pressing Option, Command, and Enter, we will open the preview window. And it's currently paused, but by pressing Option, Command, P, I can resume. And then in a couple of seconds, we should see how the UI currently looks like. And then we can start building the UI. All right, so currently it just says hello world. And let's change that. And let's change it to one of our tasks. So implement the UI. That was one of our tasks. Great. So in addition to showing the title of the task, we also want to show whether the task is completed or not, and we can use an image to do that. So let me drag out an image view from the palette here. So search for an image and then drag it and place it to the left of our label, just like that. And you will see that the source code has been updated. Currently, we don't have an image name yet, but we can use a system image. And let's use circle. And you will see that we've got a nice circle here. And then once a task is completed, we will use a different image to indicate that this is now completed. All right, so let's turn this very simple cell into a list. So command click on the H stack and then select embed in list. And then we get 5 elements. And you will notice it's still just this one element, but we will change this in a couple of seconds. Cool, so we've got our lists, we've got a cell. We also now need a button that we can use to add elements later on. So again, let's use the palette and then find the button and then drag it down here. And you can see at the bottom of the screen it says add button to a new vertical stack. That's exactly what we want. So let go. And you will see we've got a VStack, the list is in the VStack, and the button is there as well. So we want our button to say something like add new task. And obviously this needs to be in a string. And then, currently it's centered. That's one thing we need to fix. But we also want to have a nice icon to the left side of it. So let me actually wrap this manually into a H stack. And then insert an image here. Image system name equals plus dot circle dot fill. This will give us a plus icon on a filled circle. That's great. And then finally, let's change the alignment of the button to leading. So we can do that by clicking on VStack, opening up the UI inspector, which in this beta version of Xcode is broken, but no worries. Let's use our inspector on the right-hand side and choose left alignment. So everything is left aligned. So let's add a little bit of padding, and we do that on the button itself. Okay, so that looks a lot better. Cool. So one other thing that we should do is, so currently the icons are very, very small, and we should make sure that they're a little bit bigger so they're really nice touch targets. We can do that by going in and changing the image. First of all, making it resizable. And this obviously is a little bit too large. So let's go in and change the frame to, let's try 20 by 20. Okay. Let's see. This looks good. And let's do the same with our image up here in the lists. All right, so all the images are roughly the same size, which is nice because then they're really nicely aligned. And finally, let's also make sure that we've got a nice title on the screen. So we can do this by wrapping the entire current VStack into a navigation view. Navigation view. And then indent this. So there is an empty space up there, which will take our title. And then we will need to set the title on the first inner child, which is our VStack. So navigation bar title is tasks. Great. All right, so this is our very simple UI. And now let's go ahead and connect it to some test data. So if you recall, we have our nice little test data tasks collection over here in the task file. So what we want to do now is connect it to our list view here. In order to do that, we're going to introduce a new property here. And first of all, let me fix the indentation. OK, perfect. So let's introduce a new property here. Let tasks equals test data tasks. That's it. And now we can go ahead and instead of iterating over just 5 numbers here, iterate over the actual collection of data. So let's do this. So we're iterating over tasks. And now it complains that task is not identifiable. So let me increase this. So it says, the initializer requires that task conform to identifiable. All right. This is because the list view needs to know which element is which, so that when you're inserting a new element, it can tell them apart and the elements don't start jumping around. So let's go and make task identifiable. So make it identifiable. And how can we do that? So because we need an identifier later on for connecting our task with Firestore, let's introduce an ID and make sure that for now it contains a unique identifier. And we can do that by using the UUID class and get a UUID and turn it into a string like this. All right. And because we do this for all our tasks, our little collection down here will automatically assign a unique ID to each of those test data items that we've got. So let's go back into our view. And now the compile error should be gone. Compiler is happy. And now let's go ahead and actually connect all those items to the test data. So first of all, instead of displaying a static string, let's rename this to task. And then we can use it down here, task.title. And when I save this, the view should update on the right-hand side. And you can see that it's pulling data from our test data collection. That's nice. So before we also connect the completed state and show a different kind of image, so maybe a filled circle instead of an empty circle for the completed state, let's refactor the cell a little bit. So what we need to do is we want to extract those two elements here, the image and the text, into a separate view. To make this easier, let me go ahead and turn this into a HStack again, because then we can just extract it. Oh, sorry. OK, so fix the indentation, and then command click on the HStack and extract subview. And we're going to call it task cell. Great. So we've got a couple of compile errors here that we need to fix. So the reason why the compiler is complaining is that down here in our new struct, it's not entirely sure what task means because task is unknown down here. So we can fix that by inserting a new property here, call it task. That should fix the compile errors down here. But obviously, we've got a new compile error up here. So we need to tell it to inject this variable into the cell down there. And let's compile again. All right, build succeeded. That's great. So now we can go into our task cell and make sure that we display the correct icon for the completed state. So we want to display a filled circle when the task is completed and a non-filled circle when it's not completed. So currently, it seems like all the tasks are not completed, which is clearly wrong. So let's use a ternary if statement here. So task.completed, and if it is completed, we want to use checkmark.circle.fill. And if it's not completed, we will use circle. Okay, let's see how that looks like. And resume our preview. All right, so it works. We display the implement UI task as this is completed, because in our test data we said it was completed and all the other elements are not completed. So this looks very, very nice. And that's it for our basic UI. Before we go any further, let's take a quick look at our architecture. So let me pull up my preview application. And let's have a look at our architecture diagram. So you can see that up here we've got our views, and the views uses, or each single view uses one view model, and in turn the view model configures the view. So depending on the state of the view model, the view will look differently. So for example, if we think back, or if we look back into our UI, you can see that the checkmark icon is only there because the view model for this specific task item said that the completed state is true. So in this sense, the view model configures the view. So where do the view models get the data from? So ultimately, we want to connect to Firebase and Firestore, but we need a little helper class to make this more manageable and to help us build a better architecture. So we're going to use a repository, and the repository really is just there to make it easier to connect to Firebase. So what it will do is it will open a Firebase connection, a Firestore connection, and it will pull data, and it will listen to updates, and it will also take requests from the view model to add new elements to Firebase when the user adds new elements to their view. So, and you can see this on the architecture diagram, that the repository in turn works with the storage, which in our case is Firestore, to store and retrieve data. And in turn, it will return model elements which are owned by the view model. Right, so let's start and go ahead and implement the view model for our task cell view. So let's first create a new group here for our view models. And drag it down a little bit. And then we will create a new class, new file. And let's call it task cell view model. All right. So it's going to be a class task cell view model. And it needs to be an observable object. This is so that SwiftUI can observe any changes that we make to the properties on this view model. And it also needs to be identifiable because we want to display, or we want the list view to use those task cell view models. And as we saw before, it is important to actually have elements that are identifiable. Okay, so each of those task cell view models will hold a reference to a task. So a task. But it's not enough that we just hold a reference. We need to make sure that this is published so that any change on the task can be listened to. So let's use the published annotation to make this a publisher. All right. So we need another property that helps us to make this identifiable, and this is going to be the ID, and it's going to be a string. And then we want to also hold the name for the icon that we're going to use to indicate the completion state. So that again is going to be a published property, published variable, completion state icon name, and this is a string. And let's make this an empty string, and also let's make the ID an empty string as well. This will help us with the initializer, as you can see in a minute. All right, so in the initializer, we are going to do a couple of things. So first of all, the initializer will take the task, and then we want to operate on the task. So first of all, let's make sure that we keep track of the task. So let's assign it to our property here. And then let's go ahead and run a map operation on the task. And what we want to do is we want to transform the task into a string. And the string is going to tell us which icon to use. So let's use the transform signature here. And we will have a task coming in. And then we're going to look at the task. And if it's completed, we're going to return checkmark dot circle dot fill, and if it's not, we're going to return circle. So this probably looks very familiar to you because it's exactly what we've been doing in the UI, but we're extracting this into the view model now. All right, so the next thing that we need to do is we want to assign the result of the map operation to this property up here. And in combine, we can do this by using the assign operator. And we're going to assign this to a property of self. And it's going to be completion state icon name. And then finally, we need to keep track of our subscribers and assign them to a cancelable. So let's set this up here. Private var cancellables is a new set of any cancelable. And in order to use that, we need to import combine. All right, and now we can store this in this cancellables collection. Cool. So once again, we are mapping over the task, and then depending on its state, we will return the name for the icon, store this into this property, and this is for memory management purposes down here. Okay, so that's the first thing we need to do. And then the other thing that we need to do is we need to keep track of the ID, and this is going to look very similar. So .task.map. And then we've got a task coming in. And we will return the task ID. And then we're going to assign it to the ID property. And then let's store this into the cancellables. Cool. So that's our task cell view model. So one view model down, we need another view model. So you might be wondering, why do we need two view models? The reason is that we've actually got two different views. So we've got the list view itself, and we've got the cell view. So this view model that we've currently built is for the cell, and we now need to have a view model for the list as well. So let's create a new class and name it task list view model. And let's import combine. And it's going to be a class as well, task list view model. And it's an observable object. It does not need to be identifiable because it's basically the wrapper around all the elements that we're going to display in the list. But it has a property to keep all those task cell view models. So task cell view models is an array of task cell view model. And let's create an empty array when we initialize. We also need the cancellables. All right, and then here's our initializer. And in the initializer, for now, we will still operate on the test data, and we will convert all those test tasks into little task cell view models. And this is actually pretty straightforward. So task cell view models equals tests data tasks dot map. Oops. That was a little bit quick. Let me do it this way. All right. So for each task that we get, we will basically return a task cell view model, and we will just send in the current task. Cool, so we've got our two view models, and now what we need to do is we need to bind them to the UI. So let's go back into our list view, and what we need is a reference to our task list view model. So let's do this. It is a variable, task list view model, and we will instantiate this. And then, so that we can bind the UI to it, it needs to be an observed object. This will allow SwiftUI to listen to any updates that this is going to produce. All right, so missing argument for parameter task and call. Oh yeah, I know why, because this is the wrong class. So task list view model, that's the right one. Okay. So now, instead of iterating over this collection of tasks that we've got, we will instead access our view model and iterate over the tasks collection in that view model. Okay, let's do it. So task list view model. And we need to iterate over the task cell view models in there. So compiler is still complaining a bit. So let's do a little bit of cleanup here. So first of all, this is going to be task cell view model. And then we need to refactor the task cell as well down here. So again, we're going to use an observed object. And this time, let's call it task cell view model. And it is a task cell view model. Right. And then let's remove this because we don't need it anymore. And then let's fix the compile errors down here. So first of all, access the task down here, and then change this down there. Okay, so this should be fine. And then up here, we're going to access this variable in our list. Cool, so this looks good. Let's see if it compiles. Looking good so far. Build succeeded. Okay, so let's run the application and see if everything works as before. And instead of running the application, let's actually use the preview down here, because we can use this little run button to run the application. And let's see, it takes a little moment. Oh, probably I need to resume. Build succeeded. And okay, it's working. So in case you don't believe me, let's also run it on the simulator. Compiling, launching. Let's get the simulator. All right, there we go. So we refactored our UI to use a model view model architecture. And this makes things a lot cleaner, and it will lead to much cleaner code, especially in the views, as you will see later on. And it's a lot easier to connect to different sorts of backends, which we'll do in a moment. So there are a couple of things that don't work yet in our application, and we need to fix them. So for example, we can't add new elements to our lists, and we can't edit the elements in the list, and we can't mark elements as done. So this is something that we are going to look into next. All right, so let's go back to the code. So the first thing that we need to do is we want to refactor our list items a little bit. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this list here into a for each. And this is because we actually want to iterate over all the elements in our collection. And then we also want to add one specific new element, and this is going to be our editor element, if you will. And this is why we need to take the list apart. So first of all, let's just replace this with a for each loop, and the rest can stay the same, and then embed this into a list. Right. So let's indent this. Cool. So we also need to declare a flag that will help us to hide and show this very specific cell on demand when the user presses on this Add New Task button down here. So let's go ahead and add this as a state up here. So state or present add new item, and let's say it's false for the moment. So we want to hide it initially. And then in addition to this for each loop, we will display a task cell depending on whether present add new item is true or false. So let's make a little conditional here. If present add new item is true, then we want to display a new task cell, and it takes a new task cell view model, and so that means we need to create a dummy task cell view model right here. So let's actually do that. And then we need to create a dummy task as well. And it's got an empty title, and the completion state is false. Right. So this is our additional cell. Currently it's not being displayed, and we want to change that. So whenever the user presses the button here, we want to show or hide this additional cell up there. And we can do this by toggling the present add new item Boolean. Okay, let's have a look if that works. Quickly run the application. Okay, when I press on the button, it will show or hide a new element. And currently that doesn't do anything because we're still using a text instead of a text field. So this is something that we need to change now. Okay, so let's go into our task cell and then turn this text here into a text field. So let me just delete it, text field, and then it needs to be bound to the title of the task, and we can also provide a placeholder text. So enter the task title. That's what we want to display if there is nothing in there. And then we want to bind the text value of the text field to our title of the task in our view model. So that's the task cell view model, and then the task and the title. Okay, let's try this again. Okay, add a new element. So you can see the placeholder text, enter the task title, and when I click in here, I can start typing. And I can also tap into any of the other elements as well, because we're using the same cell for this editor cell and for any existing task that we display in our list as well. Which is exactly what we want, because we want to allow users to just tap into the list and then change the elements without having to turn on edit mode or whatever. So this is exactly what we want. All right, so the next thing that we need to do is we actually want to listen to any changes that the users make so that we can take those changes from the cell view model and put it back into the underlying data structure. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to add a little callback handler, because we want to listen to the onCommit event on the text field, and whenever that is fired, we want to call back into our view that can then take the task that we've created and send it back into the underlying data structure. Okay, so first of all, let's add a new variable up here. It's called onCommit. And what we want to do is we want to send a task. And obviously, it doesn't return anything. So if we do that, the compiler will complain. And it will say that there is a missing argument up here. And there is a missing argument down here, which is fine, because down here, we actually want to handle the callback. But up here, we don't want to do that, because we already have an element. We don't need to add it to our collection. And SwiftUI and Combine are going to make sure that any changes that we make to an existing element gets reflected in the underlying data structure. So what we want to do is we will basically just provide an empty default implementation here, just like that. And this should fix the compiler error message up here. So that's great. The next thing that we want to do is we want to capture the onCommit event on the text field. And actually, let me make a little bit more space and hide the preview. So we want to capture the onCommit event on the text field. So let's go ahead and listen for onCommit. And then when we receive this, we want to call this callback up here. So self.onCommit. And what we want to do is we want to send the task back down. All right, so whenever the user commits in the text field, so if they press the enter button, for example, then we will receive this callback, and then we're going to take the current task, send it into our callback, and then we can capture it in here. All right, so to do that, I'm going to use the fact that this basically is just a trailing closure. And then we will get the task here. And then we want to do something similar to this. So we want to get the task view model, or the task list view model. And then we'd like to do something like add task. But there is no method like that yet. So this will fail. All right, so let's fix this. Let me just comment this out so we can compile. And then we will go into our task list view model and implement a method that will capture our intent. So add task, and we want to take a task, and then we'll just add it to our list of task cell view models. However, we need to first turn it into a task cell view model. So let's do that. task view model equals task cell view model, and it will take a task, and then we can add it to our collection. And we will append it so it will be added to the end. Great. So let's go back, uncomment this. So this works fine. One more thing that we should do is when the user hits enter, we will insert the element into the list. So that means that the list will add a new line, and that will look a little bit funny. Let me show you what this means. So let's run the application. So we've got our existing cells here. We add a new one, and I will hit enter. And as you saw, it inserted the new item into the collection. SwiftUI picked this up, updated the list view, and we still have this element down here, and this looks a little bit funny. So let's actually make sure that we hide this cell down here whenever we insert a new line. And that's actually pretty straightforward. So let's say self.present and new item.toggle. So this means whenever we add a new element, we will hide our editor cell. Let's have a look again. Okay, let me add a new element. Okay, and you will see we only have the new element, the editor cell disappeared, and when I add a new element, it will show up again just as expected. So that works great. What still doesn't work is updating the completed state. So let's do this as well. And this is a little bit more, it's easier. So let's go into our cell down here. And then we want to make sure that whenever the user taps on the image, we will toggle the completed state of the underlying task. So let's go ahead and add an on-tap gesture, and then get our task cell view model, get the task, get the completed state, and then just toggle it. All right, let's run the application once more. And then I can just go ahead and toggle the completed state of the items. Beautiful. And that's it for today, folks. Hope you enjoyed this short video about how to build a simple task list using SwiftUI. In the next episode, I'm going to show you how to connect this app to Firebase and how to store the task data in Cloud Firestore. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.